Hey guys, it's Dr. May. So this video is called Overcoming Loneliness. It's a companion video to my other video called Understanding Loneliness. So the first video talked about, the process of how loneliness develops and some common causes for it. And it kind of explored that whole issue pretty thoroughly. So this one is mostly about coping skills. Like now that I am feeling lonely, what could I do about it, right? To start to feel a little bit more connected. So this is the goal of this one. Okay, so overcoming loneliness. All right. So loneliness essentially is when you feel like your connection needs are not being adequately met, right? So when you feel like, you're lacking, that you don't even either have enough people in your life or you do have people, but you don't feel adequately connected to them. Okay. So how do I overcome that feeling? Okay. So here's some tips for you. So one is it's important to build a connection with ourselves. Okay. In the first video, I talked about how we often fragment ourselves because of certain parts of ourselves are reinforced by people in our environment, and we were allowed to feel certain things and allowed to have certain experiences. And then other parts were not reinforced much at all. We were kind of made to feel like we had to get rid of them or judge them or push them away, right? So for example, it might have been acceptable for me to be happy, but less acceptable for me to be anxious, or less acceptable for me to be angry. And so I tried to push those feelings and experiences aside so I could maintain a bond with my caregiver, right? So I tried to show them the things that were okay and hide the things that weren't okay. But as I got older, that split within myself just magnifies. So even within myself, I might experience that there's parts that are okay and parts that are not okay. And I end up judging and hating the parts that are not okay and trying to get rid of them. But when I don't embrace my full self, I feel like there's a hole within myself. And that hole is the loneliness because I don't embrace and love all the aspects of myself. So one of the first things we have to do is build a connection with ourselves and with the different parts of ourselves, right? So all the parts need to be allowed. They need to be allowed to be there, right? And to feel like they're loved, okay? So one of the things we could think about is to use the self-compassion process, okay? So Kristen Neff, who does a lot with self-compassion, talks about these three components, right? So I'm gonna start with mindfulness on the right first, even though it's in this meme, it's a little out of order. So first, we have to be with the different parts of ourselves, observe them, sit with them, okay? Like it says there, notice our struggles. Notice the struggles of the different parts of ourself. What is the angry part going through? What is the scared part going through? What's the shameful part going through? So instead of reacting to it and hating it, just sit with it, observe it, right? Avoid judging it. Then I'm going to go to the left now. Direct kindness toward those parts, love those parts, listen to them, right? So instead of being critical and saying, oh, get out of here, what's the matter with you? I hate, embrace them, listen to what they have to say. And remember that the lonely feeling we're having, or whatever those parts are experiencing, everyone else in the world also experiences. So loneliness makes you feel alone, makes you feel like the only one. But when you remember that everyone goes through it sometimes, and there's a sense of common humanity there, we feel less alone, right? I'm not the only one that feels shame. I'm not the only one that feels depressed, right? Everyone else goes through this sometimes too, okay? So that's an important part of building that inner connection. So going at this process even more, right? From the fragmentation to wholeness. So here's some extra suggestions. So first we have to open our eyes to the parts that we've not been paying attention to, right? We have to recognize what they are. Maybe give them a name, right? This is my anger part. This is my appease and please part. This is my attach part, and try to accept them, right? Give them the love, caretaking, and soothing that maybe they never got from our own parents. We have to parent them ourselves, okay? Think of them not as the enemies, but as maybe suffering inner children that just need our care, right? Listen to what they have to say. Kind of feel them, see them, right? Show them compassion, like we're just talking about self-compassion. Re-own them. Allow them to sit back at the inner table of your world again, okay? And bring them closer to you in a state of belonging with you rather than shoving them away, right? And when we feel more wholeness, we feel more that inner connection, it's going to reduce our sensation of loneliness, okay? Next, They talk about a quality that they call authenticity, okay? So authenticity is their term basically means wholeness, okay? Like I was just talking about, that the inside matches the outside. When I embrace all different aspects of myself, I can bring my full self into the world. I don't have to split myself into a private part that I just keep to myself and a public persona, right? I can be truly my whole self and express all the things that I need to express, right? So when they talk about authorship or self-congruence, that's what that means. I'm congruent. The inside and the outside are congruent, or they match, right? So if I have a value, something that's important to me on the inside, I'm able to express that in the actions and my interactions on the outside, right? So if I value honesty, I don't just value honesty and then tell lies. I value honesty and I attract honest people, and I'm honest about how I feel with people, right? So my inside and my outside match. The authorship means, like, think about authoring a book. I'm writing my own story. I'm having some agency, some power in the way I choose to live my life. I don't just feel blown by the wind, right? So I'm making choices that are in line with my values. I'm not just seeing where my impulses take me, okay? Next, I have a resistance to being controlled. That's also part of an authorship in a way, right? I'm not just gonna let people boss me around. I might not just follow the crowd, I may not just go along with something that makes me uncomfortable. I'm gonna think about what's important to me, where my boundaries are, how to preserve myself, and say no when necessary, okay? And put it out there, just be authentic about my no. On the bottom left, like Curious George over there, instead of hating my parts and my feelings and my loneliness, I'm going to be curious about it, right? I'm going to investigate it further, see what they have to tell me, right? And not just push them away or be afraid of them, right? They say that it's important to love the parts you're afraid of and the parts that, I'm sorry, but I think I messed it up. Anyway, we'll get back to that in a second. And also what authentic people are able to do because of these things, they're able to enjoy solitude, right? So solitude, as I defined in the other video, is being at peace with being with yourself and being alone. It's a replenishing time of reflecting on yourself, thinking your own thoughts without the influence of outside people. So authentic people aren't afraid to be alone with themselves because there's not a war going on in the inside. They're okay exploring themselves on their own and just being. Okay, so enjoyment of solitude is a quality of authenticity. Okay, another thing that's really important for us to do is to change our thinking, right? So when we're lonely, we tend to have a lot of distorted negative thoughts, okay, because our brain is in threat mode and we tend to perceive much more negative. We're kind of hyper vigilant to threats from other people and the environment. So we got to catch ourselves thinking these things, observe these loneliness related thoughts, without assuming that they're just the truth, right? I might assume that no one's going to like me, or that I'm not worthy of connection, or that this relationship's not going to work out anyway, or someone's just going to eventually abandon me, so why try, right? So I could just notice myself thinking these things without buying into them, right? Let the thoughts come and go, and just maybe even be curious about them, okay? And once I realize I loosen the grip on the thoughts, then I could start to challenge them. Well, how do I know that's really true? Is it possible that there's another positive spin on this that I could take? Maybe I could see it in a different way, right? So I don't have to just go along with the thinking. I could actually change my thinking, right? And it could help sometimes to write down the thoughts you think you're having, so it kind of gets it on paper, makes it clearer, and then to kind of write the positive thoughts or the challenged thoughts next to it, okay? So it kind of gets it out of your head, makes it a little bit easier to work with. Another thing that helps a lot of people is a gratitude list. So when you're in loneliness, you're in a state of lack, right? You're feeling like you're lacking a connection, that there's a hole inside you that you're trying to fill. So when you think of gratitude, you're thinking about how full you already are, thinking about the things you already have, not the things that you're missing. And so this is an important tool to kind of fill yourself back up again, and also to balance out your negative thinking. Because when you're feeling grateful, it stirs up more positive thinking because you're remembering what I do have that I'm thankful for. Another thing we could do, which is kind of like a thinking skill, is to plan ahead, right? So if I know I'm going to enter a circumstance where I might feel lonely, there might be some steps I could take in advance to plan for how I can handle it, okay? So for example, if I know I'm gonna be changing jobs, or I know I'm gonna be moving, or I know I'm gonna be going to a party where I don't know anybody, I might be able to plan ahead for how I can cope when I get there, so I'm not completely caught off guard and surprised, okay? All right. Another thing we could try to do is if you're lonely, try to fake it till you make it. Try to adopt some of the qualities that non-lonely people have, okay? So here are some of these qualities. I'm just gonna do a brief review of them right now. So while lonely people tend to be in threat mode, right, because you feel threatened being alone and you perceive threats in your environment, you're a little bit more emotional, right? You're more an emotional mind. So one of the things you could do is to use your emotion regulation skills to try to stay calm and regulate your emotions better, okay? Because when you're calmer, your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain is more online and you're able to perceive things more accurately, right? You're able to work well with other people. You're able to empathize better, right? So once you calm down your emotions, your thinking brain's much more available to you, right? And when you're less emotional, you're apt to have fewer problems in your relationships, okay? Another quality of non-lonely people is that they're able to stay open and available to other people, right? So instead of closing down in a protective mode, right, you kind of like, you know, be a little bit more open and flexible and show warmth with other people and, you know, go with the flow of a conversation, okay? So try to like calm down, loosen up a little bit, try to be in the moment with the person, right? So like I said on the right side, stay mindfully in the moment during interactions, right? When you're concerned about the potential threats, you're not that mindful. But when you try to just be with the person, right? Observe them, notice what they're saying, notice their body language, right? Be in the moment. It kind of makes you more available to them and more able to respond in a more reflecting kind of a way, right? More of an empathic kind of a way. So try to observe social cues as accurately as you can, okay? So instead of perceiving threat where there may not be threat, try to see what's actually being put out there, you know? And if you have to check with somebody to, you know, maybe check with them, you know, if you're not sure. Or if there's someone with you in an interaction with a third person, maybe you could just check your perceptions with somebody else if you can't really, if you're not sure if you could trust your own, okay? So try not to have too much of a negative bias. Another thing you can do when you're meeting people is to try to find things in common because that increases a sense of connection. Okay, so instead of focusing on what's different about you, try to find something that's the same about you. Okay, also non-lonely people, excuse me, tend to be a little bit more positive and optimistic. So they try to expect the best from others or assume things will probably work out. And you might say, well, that's not really true. But is it really just as true to assume that it's not going to work out, right? So if both sides could be equally biased, why not choose the positive side? You know, have a little bit more faith in, well, maybe there's a possibility here, okay? But realistic though, you don't want to miss signs and signals from other people that they're not into you, okay? So try to be realistic, but where possible, try to be optimistic. I'm sorry, whoops. Ooh. Okay, another thing that they suggest is to be of service to other people. They use the analogy of being fed, right? When we're lonely, we have a hunger for connection. But they say that instead of like feeding ourselves, we fill that hole by feeding others. So when we are of service to other people, right, it kind of gives us a certain what they call like a helper's high, right? It feels good to help other people. We're wired for altruism and for helping, right? Because we're social creatures. So if I volunteer or I help others in some way, it gives me a little boost, right? And when I collect those little positives and I notice that they're happening across different situations, it starts to make me feel like I want to do it a little bit more. And it's the beginning of being able to connect with other people and to shift our perception, to shift our feeling, okay? And another good thing about being of service is it adds a sense of purpose or meaning to our life, right? Like if you're feeling like kind of lonely and depressed, you might be feeling like, I don't know what the point is, right? Sometimes without relationships that are significant, we don't feel like there's as much meaning and purpose. But being of service could help provide that, right? And that could be a good way to increase your life satisfaction and so forth. Okay, so some tips about building connections with other people. So reminder that you don't need a million friends, right? So sometimes we feel like we have to have a whole bunch of people in our life, right? And I don't know how I'm going to find all these people, especially if you're younger and you're in high school and so forth. But sometimes, you know, even just a few true friends is enough to fill our need for connection, okay? Or a partner, you know, whatever works for you. Another thing to do is to look in your community, see what's available, and maybe join some kind of an organization or a club where you have things in common with people. So like in the picture there, like those people are bowlers, you know, maybe they get together every week and they have a bowling thing and you know, they bond over the bowling, right? Sometimes like when you meet the same people in the same activity every week, it fosters a chance to build a connection, right? You need to have regular contact with people. So figure out maybe something that you like or something you want to try and just keep showing up, especially if it's a thing where the same people keep coming, okay? All right, and on the bottom, they've shown that gardening, exercise, laughter, and reminiscence linked to reductions in loneliness, okay? I'm assuming especially if you do these with other people, but they found that those particular activities help, okay? So even if you think about laughing with people, it's kind of a bonding experience, you know, so any of those opportunities to do those things might help, okay? Another thing to keep in mind is skillful use of technology. My other video, I talked about how sometimes our internet usage could be a substitute, you know, a way of medicating our loneliness or something that promotes more loneliness because we have superficial relationships with people online, right? But if we skillfully use technology, it actually can help, right? So let's say right now, COVID-19 pandemic, we can't visit people as much as before. But, you know, if we use Zoom to connect with people, or FaceTime or Google Duo or whatever it is, you know, maybe it could actually increase the connection that we have, okay? So the more close to real life connection we have, the better, right? So if it's very distant, like a text or an email, that's not as good as, let's say, something with a picture, right? Like a visual. In person is the best, but if you have to do a substitute, something like FaceTime would be good, right? At least you can maintain some kind of contact and reduce your loneliness. Okay, and when you are with people in person, especially with family, it's important to carve out some time without technology, right? Because it reduces your ability to connect, right? If everyone's at the table with their phones, they're not really connecting as much with each other, right? Because you're distracted by your device. So if you have certain times when you're just yourselves, you know, it actually increases the chance that you could feel that bond, okay, and create that bond. Okay, and finally, if it's not always possible to bond with people, you can certainly connect in other ways, right? Everybody and everything is interconnected. That's just the reality of the universe, right? So we could certainly connect with animals. You know, if you have a pet, that's great. Other times you could visit petting zoos, you could volunteer at an animal shelter, but having the bond with animals could be really helpful. Okay, you could also connect with nature, right? Being outside in nature and feeling the interconnectedness between you and all the nature and earth around us, right? That could help too, right? You don't feel as alienated in that kind of situation. And also connecting to a higher power, right? This doesn't necessarily mean religion. It's just connecting to the universe, connecting to something bigger than yourself, all right? And that could be an important part of the process as well. Okay, so these are just some tips that I've collected from a variety of sources. But these are two books that I read that I do like a lot. The first one is just called Loneliness by John Cacioppo and William Patrick. It goes into a lot of the evolutionary, you know, background to why loneliness is something that we've developed. It talks about this animal research, this human research, this, you know, all kinds of stuff in there. It talks about the process of how we develop loneliness. There's a lot of brain stuff in there. So if you're a little more academically minded, that's a good book for you. The Teal Swan book on the right, The Anatomy of Loneliness, How to Find Your Way Back to Connection, was really excellent. It talked about loneliness, but it also touched on a lot of other important topics too. And if you're in DBT, you probably can relate to a lot of the things that they talk about. There's things about fear and shame and parts of self and all kinds of stuff. And it's very readable. It's for anybody. Whereas the loneliness book on the left is a little more academic. Okay, so just wanted to share that with you in case you're interested. Okay, and that's the main gist of the skills. Of course, you could also add on motion regulation skills for reducing the motion dysregulation that happens with loneliness. And you could add on interpersonal effectiveness skills for building better relationships while you're trying to build the connections that will help you overcome your loneliness. Okay, so hope that helped a little bit, and see you next time. Bye, guys.